The Dallas Cowboys will officially interview Brian Schottenheimer this week for their head coaching vacancy. Do we like that idea? We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are discussing the news that the Cowboys will officially interview Brian Schottenheimer sometime this week. I don't know if we got the details when. Again, we talked about this a little bit on Monday's show, Landon, but now that it's official that Schottenheimer will interview, do you think he is a realistic option to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean, I think realistic. Yeah, I mean, I think he's certainly in the running. I tend to think that he's probably somewhere in that same category as, some of these other guys where that he may be kind of being interviewed kind of casually for the head coaching job, but also potentially being kind of discussed as an offensive coordinator candidate. Though that doesn't really play as much with Schottenheimer because clearly the Joneses have familiarity with him as an offensive coordinator, although maybe he kind of could come in and give you an idea of what he would do as a play caller, because I think that's kind of the really interesting thing about all of this is that, as opposed to Zimmer, right, where you had a guy who was the play caller, defensive play caller last year, so he kind of just steps in. I mean, Schottenheimer gives you some of the familiarity, obviously, because he was the offensive coordinator last year, but I have to imagine that he is probably going to, call a little bit of his own offense as well. So if he is the offensive play caller and he becomes the head coach, do you lose a little bit of the continuity that you were hoping to gain by having him as the head coach? There's a lot of questions here, despite the fact that he's, like I said, a continuity hire. But I think that the first question I have is he a serious candidate to be, potentially a head coach? And if so, who are your coordinators? Are you planning on calling plays? Because these are all things that are going to weigh heavily in my thought process of how to feel about it, honestly.
Yeah, I've got a lot of different thoughts here. So my first thought when I saw that he was in an interview was I wasn't surprised, right? It does seem like he's somebody that is very well liked in the building. We know that Dak Prescott is a big fan of him. So it doesn't hurt to interview him just to see what ideas he has.
Yeah.
My next thought, this is where it gets a little harder, is to me, hiring Brian Schottenheimer would almost feel like a placeholder. Now, whether that's a placeholder until Bill Belichick wants to come back into the NFL next year, whether that's a placeholder until Jason Witten is ready to potentially be the next head coach, or just to wait until another cycle to see which coaches would be available. And I feel bad for saying that because I wish this would work out for Schottenheimer. I wish it would be awesome if he was the next great coach for the Dallas Cowboys, but it doesn't necessarily feel like that's what's going on. I don't feel like they absolutely love him. To me, it feels like he's a fallback option if they can't land a Kellen Moore or a Deion Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like they are, it feels like you're getting a lot of different information about this coaching search at this point. It's kind of pointing in several different directions. But I do think that one thing that we can kind of say now is that it does feel like they're not afraid to kind of stretch out a little bit and take their time. And I do think that you're right that they are kind of knocking out some candidates who seem like fallback candidates if they don't get the specific guys that they are looking for. So I do feel like that Schottenheimer kind of falls into that category a little bit, right? Where, he's not getting a lot of other consideration from not getting any other consideration from other teams from what I understand.
I believe he's a free agent as well. He hasn't even interviewed for an offensive coordinator job anywhere else.
Yeah. And this is going to be a little delicate, but I actually get that, like I actually, I think I probably feel about the same as him becoming a head coach as him becoming a play calling offensive coordinator, because I think honestly, John Owning like tweeted it earlier, like my feelings exactly, which he does so often. I need him to stop because those are my thoughts. Is I kind of feel like he may be suited better to be a head coach than an offensive coordinator. Like I think the things that he does well, the things that make him a good coach, are not necessarily like the X's and O's analytical mind aspect of it, as much as a guy who understands how to speak to human beings and convey complex ideas to break them down to people. I think he may end up being a more talented head coach than he is as talented offensive coordinator. I guess what I'm saying here is that bar is very high, though.
No, the other thing is like, why are you hiring an
Yeah.
offensive-minded head coach that doesn't call plays? Like it's strange. Now,
Which is why we need an offensive coordinator name, right? Like, because like if it's him, then I'm out, really. Because like I didn't love you as only an offensive coordinator. I sure don't want the distracted head coach version of your offensive coordinatorship.
Now, if you pair this with one of the tweets, I think it was Clarence Hill said that the Cowboys thought that Robert Saleh had a really good interview, and I think they were kind of blown away by Robert Saleh in the interview. Maybe you're interviewing Brian Schottenheimer with the idea of like, hey, if we hire Robert Saleh to be the head coach, would you want to stick around and be the play caller here in Dallas? I wonder if they're trying to, and this is a bad way to do your head coaching search, but I wonder if they're trying to figure out the best pairing of like, hey, is Saleh as our head coach and Schottenheimer as our OC better than Schottenheimer as the head coach and Saleh as our DC? Again, bad way to conduct a head coaching search, but we know that that's the way they work, because that's what happened with Wade Phillips. It's what happened with Jason Garrett. It's what happened with Mike McCarthy the same way. So I do wonder if that's going on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not the best way to handle it, but I don't know that it's any worse than any of the other ways that these other teams are handling their interviews. It seems like, I mean, Jacksonville just decided to go with Trent Baalke instead of giving Ben Johnson a chance. So, none of these ownership teams are doing the right thing, it seems like. I think you're right, though. I do think that's why, again, it does feel like the Saleh and Schottenheimer kind of interviews are similar in that sense, right? Where it's like, yeah, we're interviewing you. We're certainly hearing you out about your thought about being the head coach, but also we kind of just want to keep your number close in case we want to call you up for a play calling job in case we hire somebody else as the head coach.
I just don't know what to think about this. I think one of the things that I do know is that if they hire Schottenheimer, I think that would be, of all the names that we've heard outside of maybe Kellen Moore, probably the best for Dak Prescott. However, Lane, I don't want to say I'm past the point of caring what Dak thinks.
No.
But you need to hire a coach that can coach everybody and not just a quarterback. I understand how important that position is. It's the most important position in sports. But Dak's had it pretty easy over the last several years. I think it's time to find the right guy for the entire team and not just Dak.
I think that there's something to the idea that like Dak Prescott shouldn't be the only person making final calls on how this offense should be run. And I understand that he obviously has final say on play calling because of the ability to audible and all that stuff. But it does feel like there is a need to kind of put Dak into a situation where maybe he's outside his comfort zone in order to have him break through a little bit. And so
I think he needs some. I don't want to say some hard coaching, because that would imply that
you need someone to push him instead of just making
challenge him a little bit.
Challenge him. Yeah. And get him out of his comfort zone a little bit to get him to do new things. And I think, again, if you do the same thing that you do over and over again, you're going to get the same results. So they need to try something different. And if that means making Dak, slightly uncomfortable, pushing Dak in directions that maybe he's not normally comfortable in order to kind of get better results on offense, they need to do that.
All right, let's talk about some coaching updates, because we had a big coach leave the Cowboys on Monday. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater, or whatever. It's all fantastic. One of my favorite memories was going to a Bills playoff game, sitting there in the cold with all the Bills fans. So much fun. The energy and the excitement was unforgettable. Now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. There are so many great features on the app. My favorite is you can toggle the all-in pricing, so you know exactly how much your tickets are going to cost before you check out, so you're not surprised with any fees or anything like that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing some coaching updates for the Dallas Cowboys. And we got a big one on Monday. Bones Fossil, the Cowboys special teams coach who's been here through the entire Mike McCarthy coaching tenure, has decided to leave for the Tennessee Titans, the team that had the worst record in the NFL this year. I'm not surprised to see him leave, but it is interesting that he would leave this situation where the Cowboys clearly wanted him back. I saw a report from Todd Archer that the Cowboys really, really wanted him. He decided to move on and go join Brian Callahan in Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a real bummer. I mean, I really liked Bones Fossil. I thought he was really, really a difference maker on the special teams group. I think he's one of the best special teams coaches in the league. Definitely. Again, you can't say it enough about a guy who is passionate about that position, right? Because I feel like you get a lot of special teams coordinators and you get half and half, right? Some of them are trying to use this as a stepping stone to other coaching jobs, right? And so they're trying to they're stuck in this spot. They've been put there by somebody for some reason, and then they kind of get, if you're good at it, you get stuck at it. And then there's guys like Bones who are legitimately good at it, understand that they're legitimately good at it, and like that's what they want to coach, and they focus on it, and they become obsessed with the details with it. And so, yeah, it sucks to lose Bones. I think obviously, the Cowboys just are in a situation where there's a lot of unknown here, and Bones didn't want to have to sort through all of that. It can't be a great sign that he's headed to Tennessee where there's not exactly a super stable situation. I think Callahan was definitely feeling a warm seat this offseason after the season was over. But I think that, it's one of those situations that until we hear from Bones himself about the specifics of what happened there, you just have to assume that he just thought it was a better situation for him and his family, and that it was time for a change.
There's also, the part of it where there's only so many of these jobs available every year.
Yeah.
And if the Cowboys really are going to take till mid-February to figure out their coaching search, there's a chance that you could just hire a coach that has their own special teams coordinator, and all of a sudden Bones is without a job. So I think the fact that he is leaving Dallas to go to Tennessee, I think indicates that maybe the Cowboys aren't that close to hiring a head coach, or maybe he knows, or he's got a good feeling of who the next head coach is, and that's why he decided to leave. And maybe that head coach already got somebody picked out. I do want to say really quickly before we move on, CJ Goodwin, my sister lives in Nashville. If you need housing, I'll let you know. You're going to love it. It's great because I can't imagine CJ Goodwin going anywhere else without Bones.
No. And listen, I mean, if this is goodbye, thank you to both of y'all for some great times. I mean, listen, watermelon kick, that time in Atlanta. Just the punt returns, the block kicks.
Twice in Atlanta. Twice they recovered kicks against Atlanta on onside kicks.
That's right.
Well, and I saw some people yesterday on Twitter being like, "Hey, look at some of the bad plays and all the fake punts." I mean, I understand that there were a couple fake punts that didn't work out, but man, he helped develop two kickers. Brett Maher had an unbelievable year before the playoff game. Then they went out and got Brandon Aubrey, who the first year was an all-pro kicker. They had one of the top return units in the league every single year. They blocked a bunch of punts and a bunch of kicks. Like, man, I don't know how you can look at the job that Bones Fossil has done over the last 5 years and not think that he's an awesome coach.
Yeah, legitimately, he was the one coach that I was like really, really hoping that they retained, for this whole situation. It's unfortunate they weren't able to. And there are other special teams coaches that are good out there, and you still have a really talented special teams core, but it does suck to lose him. That's for sure.
All right, let's do some other coaching updates because we got news on Monday that Ben Johnson has taken the Bears job. So that's one fewer job out there. But I did see a lot of Cowboy fans kind of pushing back on the idea like, hey, this was a premier candidate. Again, that doesn't mean he's going to be a great head coach, but a premier candidate that you didn't even interview. What does that say about the status of the Cowboys team, franchise? And do you think they made a mistake by not interviewing Ben Johnson?
I think people are looking too much into the interview as a means to eliminate candidates, right? Like, I think the reason the Cowboys didn't interview him is because there was very clear indication from both sides that they weren't interested in the situation that with each other, right? Like, I think you don't need to have an interview if, like, you call up the Ben Johnson's agent and his agent goes, nah, Ben's not interested in taking an interview, right? Like, that part probably doesn't get put into public.
No, but
right?
also isn't that part of the problem? Well, let's say that played out, right? And the agent's telling you like, hey, we don't want our client to even interview there. It's kind of an issue.
Yes, yes, but I will say that the Ben Johnson specific situation is different, right? He's asking for way more than almost any other, non-experienced head coach who's asking. And I'm not suggesting that he's asking for too much, all right? But I am suggesting that what he is asking for is way outside the norms of first-time head coaches, and that I do understand why some teams, and not just the Cowboys, are hesitant about letting a first-time head coach have full control over the team and deal with that situation. So I think your argument overall is sound, absolutely, that the Cowboys are not doing themselves any favors by kind of pre-eliminating good candidates. However, I think that Ben Johnson also is maybe over filtering his candidates because he's the hottest coaching candidate that there is. And that, that is not a normal ask that he's asking for like I said, a guy who's never done anything in personnel or been a head coach, before. So yeah. I can understand like the Cowboys having a deep understanding that that's not a situation that they want to give it.
It's still frustrating, at least for me. It's frustrating that they didn't even get the chance to sit down with him, but I understand what you're saying.
Wait, can I ask you a question real quick? Yeah. I asked this on Twitter, and I'm interested in your answer. If, let's say, Ben Johnson was an option, right? But the caveat is that he tells Jerry Jones that you have to get rid of Will McClay. How do you feel about that?
I'm okay with it.
You're good with getting rid of McClay to go with Ben Johnson?
I mean, it's not like I think Will McClay has done a bad job or anything, but I do think we've been talking about how this franchise needs some juice and some excitement. And it feels like there's a lot of apathy around them right now. I think as much as the Cowboy Nation loves Will McClay, I think adding Ben Johnson would have done that. It would have brought back some excitement. I just don't know if, let's say it's Kellen Moore, if Will McClay and Kellen Moore necessarily does that either.
That's fair. I just think it's I just think that you should put names to this stuff because it's easy for us to say, hey, like, oh yeah, I absolutely would do that. But then, you're trading out Will McClay for some assistant personnel guy that you don't like, but is friends with Ben Johnson, right? Like, is that a trade that you want to make? I think it's something worth considering.
The other one, and I think this one's even a little bit more surprising, is Aaron Glenn. It seems like we're recording this right around 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, is that Aaron Glenn is going to take this Jets head coaching job. And he's going to be paired with a former Lions executive. But anyways, Aaron Glenn is somebody that we thought the Cowboys would be interested in. He's a former player. The Cowboys know him well. And yet that hasn't happened either. No interview scheduled with him. Doesn't seem like that's going to be an option as well. Is it surprising to you that the Cowboys have not spoken to Aaron Glenn either?
That one is surprising to me because I do feel like there is some obviously for all the reasons that we talked about him, like there's some knowledge of who he is. There's some experience that in the building with the Joneses, and I do think that as far as experience goes, like he may not have head coaching experience just like Ben Johnson, but he's been around the league for an extremely long time, which I think kind of helps make that even less of a learning curve to some degree. He definitely checked off a lot of the boxes that you expected for Cowboys candidates, and you would expect that he have at least got an interview. I guess the question I have is, like, is he not getting an interview because the timing of the whole situation, or would the Cowboys not have interviewed him either way? I think that's kind of, where an answer we probably won't ever get. But
no,
I'm certainly more surprised that Aaron Glenn didn't get an interview than Ben Johnson.
Yeah, and I'm on record. Like, I think 2 weeks ago we said if McCarthy doesn't come back, I thought Aaron Glenn would be the head coach because of the Cowboys familiarity with him. That doesn't look like it's going to be the case. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get answers on Aaron Glenn once he officially signs with somebody, but it doesn't appear that he's going to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Landon, let's talk about the national championship game that happened on Monday night, because I had some big takeaways that I wanted your thoughts on. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to enjoy these final 2 weeks of NFL action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It is the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are absolutely loving this platform. So here is a special offer for Locked On Cowboy listeners. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Lena, let's talk about the national championship game, because there were plenty of draft prospects in that game. Do you want to start with the running backs or the wide receivers first?
Let's start with the running backs. Man, I mean, Travion Henderson showing you right away exactly the kind of special that we were talking about, right? Just immediately kind of, in that first OSU drive, I think it was the very first carry, he ripped off like a 15 or 20 yard run, right? So, and then Judkins, I think also, I mean, not that Judkins hasn't been showing you all season long that he's a good top end running back as well, but I thought that he really kind of showed you something a little bit as a receiver, catching that touchdown pass, kind of leaking out, and then just, obviously running very violently like he does. It felt like Notre Dame had a good plan for portions of this game on how to slow down Jeremiah Smith, right? Like, It's funny that when he scored that game-winning touchdown at the end, that the announcers were like, man, we haven't heard anything from Jeremiah Smith in a little while. Then suddenly catches the pass. And the reason that OSU was able to kind of continue to move the ball is because of Mbuke, and then obviously the way that the running backs were running. So both of them looked really strong last night, explosive. I thought that they both kind of lived up to the billing. What were your thoughts?
I mean, I would take either of those guys as RB1 right now for the Cowboys. Now, there have been some rumblings. Judkins is not yet declared for the NFL draft. I believe he's got till Friday to declare it. I know there's some Ohio State boosters that are trying to get him back to come back and play for one more year. We'll see what he eventually does. But yeah, I think I said this on Twitter last night. Henderson and Judkins and Omarion Hampton and Caleb Johnson are why you don't need to draft a running back in the first round. It has nothing to do with Ashton Genty. It's that those 4 or 5 running backs are all unbelievable, and they're probably going to get picked somewhere between picks 30 and 50. I just think we talk about draft sequencing all the time. If you want to get the most bang for your buck in this draft, I think it's by grabbing a stud at pick 12 and then grabbing your starting running back in round 2, and let's get going.
Now, here's where I'm starting to get worried, as I always do, is that are these guys going to start playing themselves into that, nether region between our two picks, right? Like that's where I start getting worried.
Well, where's Dallas? Is it 44 Dallas? Is that where that second round pick is at?
Yeah, I mean, someone
44.
is definitely going to be available. I'm not suggesting that all those running backs are going to get peaked up above.
But like,
44,
if you're sold on Henderson, is there a chance that
exactly.
Henderson goes to like Cleveland? I think it's possible, but I think there's
possible.
so much quality depth in this class that you might be a little bummed that you get Caleb Johnson instead of Henderson. I'm not, but I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, there, like you mentioned, the two Ohio State guys, the kid from North Carolina, the Johnson, and Hampton, and the Johnson as well.
Yeah.
I think between those four guys, and there's some, and Scatabo, and there's several other guys, kind of all in that range that you like, that I think will be there. Let's talk about the wide receivers too, though, because I think that's kind of a little interesting part of this.
So Emeka Egbuka last night became Ohio State's all-time leading receiver, and somebody had a really funny tweet that Egbuka is the all-time leading receiver at Ohio State and has never once been the number one receiver on his own team, which has been, it's true, but it's also hilarious.
That's like the most Ohio State thing ever, though. At least recently, right? Like they just constantly have like, 4 wide receiver ones on retainer, just like sitting on the bench, for them. And then, suddenly some freshman you've never heard of wearing number 87 or something pops out for one play and goes 85 yards. And they're like, oh yeah, he was a 5-star number 2 recruit of the 2025 class. It's like, they just constantly do that. And then there's guys like this, right? And Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think, is another example, right? Where he's just been on the team forever and ever and produced since he was a freshman and isn't the flashiest guy, right? He plays next to Jeremiah Smith, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
But it just consistently produces because he's just a route merchant. He's just very well refined in the game. And that has its own advantages, and that creates its own separation the same way that Jeremiah Smith's athleticism does for him.
We're going to have plenty of months to talk about Emeka Egbuka and how he would fit as a pass catcher in this offense. But watching that game last night, if you watch the long run that Judkins had, Egbuka had the kind of the ceiling block that allowed it to be like a home run. And he's an awesome blocker. You saw at times Ohio State would motion him in and he would block a linebacker or block a defensive end. Like, he's just such a skilled player. And I saw somebody compare him to Robert Woods, and that, I know if you're drafting like at 12, drafting Robert Woods isn't ideal, but if you're going to have a really good running offense, and this is something that we don't talk about very often, is your receivers have got to block. And too often at times this year, watching Jalen Tolbert and Brandon Cooks out trying to block corners and safeties was a disgrace. And it's a big reason why the run game wasn't better. So I'm not saying that you need to spend the number 12 pick on a blocking receiver, but I do think Egbuka is a winning player that's going to have a lot of value in an offense outside of just catching passes.
I think that's what it is, right? Is that blocking just can't be an afterthought,
No.
And I think a good blocking wide receiver on the edge should get actual a bump, right? And you said it, and I was actually just about to launch into this. Look at San Francisco. Look at Los Angeles, where Robert Woods got probably his the bulk of his notoriety, right? They have these wide receivers who are lights out, Deebo Samuels and Puka Nacua and all these guys. But San Francisco Rams, San Francisco and Los Angeles both have this in common, is that both of their systems really focus on having strong blockers on the edge, right? Like being able to get that extra seal off allows your 6-yard run to become a 20-yard run, right? Because you get that angle, right? So I think that it's
somebody like Jaywan Jennings for the 49ers who came into the NFL as a blocker has now become a big part of their offense. And we don't need to go over the wide zone and all that kind of stuff, but the basic philosophy is we want our receivers to be able to block safeties and linebackers so that we're forcing corners to tackle our running backs, right? That's how good running games are built.
Exactly. And the Cowboys used to do this, right? On a regular basis. Think about Cedric Wilson and Noah Brown and some of these guys who come here. They just haven't had that guy recently. They need to get another batch of these guys who can, block significantly on the edge.
And what they haven't had is the guy that's an awesome receiver and an awesome blocker. So, because we've seen in the past, and everybody knows, hey, Noah Brown's on the field on first down. What does that mean, Landon? it's a run, right? Hey, Jalen Brooks is on the field and first down. That means it's a run. If you can get one of these guys that never has to come off the field, it can be a big asset to your offense. And the 49ers mantra is what? No block, no rock.
That's right.
The Cowboys would be wise to adapt that philosophy. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Layden on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.